All right. Well, welcome to day 4, ladies and gentlemen, of week 30. Today is your last day of content before your test. Tomorrow you have a Barron's book due. It's 150 points. And you will notice if you do not do your Barron's book, woski broski, it is terrible for your grade. So please make sure that your Barron's book is due. It's definitely due. Make sure it's in before midnight tomorrow, and it is due by midnight. Tomorrow you also have a 35 question test on learning. Learning. What else did I teach you this week? I'm doing learning today. We did states of consciousness. Oh, and didn't we do sensation and perception? Wasn't that the other stuff? Ugh, what an awful week. Gross. Anyway, so you have a test on sensation and perception, states of consciousness, and learning that is happening tomorrow. So keep in mind, we do not have a video tomorrow. Your focus, your only things you need to do is take your test by midnight and submit your Barron's book. Last week, we've had a couple little things and people needed some help with some explanations about what should be in your Barron's book and stuff like that. This week I'm expecting none of those problems because I need to have no problems from AP Psych tomorrow because AP World is also doing their first test tomorrow with their Barron's book, and that's 97 kids turning in their Barron's books. So if we could not have AP Psych drama, that would be the best because they're already like in tears. So it's fine. I'm fine. So you have a Barron's book due tomorrow and you have a test due tomorrow. Both of them are due by midnight. We do not have a lecture tomorrow. If you have any questions about test format or anything, it's the exact same thing. You're going to see, you log into the test. It's a picture of an actual test. I would write 1 through 35 on a sheet of notebook paper. When you open the actual picture, I would sit there and answer all the questions, go back to the multiple choice, and then fill in your answers. Sounds good? Hello? Okay, so it's the same exact format. Same exact, nothing changed except for obviously the content. You need a video. You can either send it to Edsby or to Instagram. Either one works for me, so whatever makes you happy. I'd prefer Edsby just because, it's easier to regulate, but Instagram is perfectly fine. There's no judgment. I will be checking both. So, any questions, concerns, comments about tomorrow? No? Yes, you do. I just need like a glimpse of your face. Like, I'm not posting it. I'm not sharing it. I just need to make sure that when you submit your book, Nathan, it's not really Emily's book. Does that make sense? Because if Emily and I wasn't super harsh on it, but if you could do it for this week, that way people aren't submitting double books. You know what I mean? So I'm just trying to kind of wade off some of the cheating. So, but yeah, nothing crazy. Like, it's not going anywhere. I'm not posting anything. Like, I will say it does make it way more entertaining for me. Because some of you like get all like dressed up for it, and then some of you are like, it makes me so happy. So, but anyway, it's just for me to try to cut down on cheating. So, there's not much I can do, but I felt like that was at least a minimal protection trying to. So, well, we might as well get to it. So, I mean, are you guys doing okay? Is there anything I can do to help? We just don't need to spend time together? Do you like our Zoom meetings? Okay. Well, you guys don't really have anything ever to say to me, and it's just kind of like, hey. I mean, I like seeing your faces, but it'd be nice if, someone talked to me. Hi, Olivia. So, alrighty. Well, fun. Huh? Oh my God. Oh my God. Girl, I'm hoping Wednesday. If you could, like, whatever God or gods you pray to, if you could say Wednesday of next week would be ideal. So, like, no. I need to do writing week. I I need to get to writing week. I can't do this early. But no. It is very soon, and it's traumatizing, let me tell you. I'm terrified. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's terrifying, but we're good. We're ready. I mean, we're as ready as we're going to be. So, but if you are thinking of me, please send good juju for next Wednesday. That would be ideal. So that would just be the best. All right, let's get started. Keep in mind, just continuing the Hank trend. If there's ever a day that I don't show up, you know what to do, correct? Yes? You already have a video list of things you should be watching during those weeks. Yes, it's already on Edsby. It's been pinned for you, so you know exactly where to find it. Yes, you have your weekly assignments, how I have your instructional tools. Yes, we know where all that stuff is. So the day Miss Bennett stops showing up, you just keep going and you don't tell anyone. And I'll be back in a couple of days with a Hank. Anyway, alrighty, let's go. All right, so this week, not this week. Well, this week you do have sensation and perception, states of consciousness, and you have learning. Today we're doing learning, which honestly is a huge section. And I'd be really surprised if it wasn't on your 2 FRQs. Like states of consciousness, I don't think they're going to put on there. I hope they don't put sensation and perception because I just hate sensation and perception. But I'd be really surprised if they didn't put learning. So we're going to go through learning today. Obviously, it's 1/3 of your test tomorrow, so you definitely need it for your test for tomorrow. But I'd be surprised if there's not at least one reference to learning on your 45-minute exam. So, all right, here we go. So, what do you got? Oh, I thought someone had a question for me. So, what is learning? It's a relatively permanent change of behavior brought on by experience or practice. Okay, it's when you experience something, go through something, and then you're able to process that information. So, when we talk about learning, we're obviously going to start with classical conditioning with Pavlov. And he is going to be your foundation of learning. So Pavlov is a Russian who discovers classical conditioning by looking at how dogs drool during his training. So what is classical conditioning? It's the learning to make a reflex response to a stimulus other than the original or natural stimulus it normally produces. Now keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, it's a reflex. It's a reflex, which means it's done without thinking. Like, for instance, when you're sitting in class and you hear the bell ring, you immediately lurch up to get up and go, correct? Do you sit there and say, oh, the bell rang. Oh, I'm going to get up now. No, you immediately just get up and start shifting and going. It's done without thinking. Now, when we get to operant conditioning, okay, operant conditioning is you're weighing the positives and the negatives and being like, yeah, that's what I want. You're thinking about it. So classical conditioning is a reflex. So it's done without thinking. So when we're talking about classical conditioning, we're dealing with our favorite acronyms. Don't we remember these? Yes. So we have an unconditioned stimulus, which is something that happens involuntary and naturally. So like a dog, if I pulled out peanut butter right now and showed it to Toby, he'd start drooling. Do you think I taught Toby how to drool to peanut butter? No, because he drools all over my floor. I have to mop my floor all the time because when he drinks water, he takes a huge glurp of it and then walks around my house. So there's puddles everywhere. And when he drools, and he doesn't drool that much, thank God, but he's just makes a puddle. So no, I did not teach him that. Maybe a slight tangent there. Moving forward. So an unconditioned stimulus is something that triggers a response that was not taught. I never taught Toby to drool to peanut butter. That is an unconditioned stimulus. Toby just loved peanut butter. Unconditioned response is how Toby naturally responds to seeing peanut butter. The first time he saw peanut butter, he started drooling to peanut butter. Just like no one probably had to teach you to love pizza, but you probably love pizza. That's an unconditioned response. Okay? All right. So once you go through conditioning, once you actually do the conditioning and you teach the animal to do something over and over and over again, then you have a conditioned stimulus. Okay, so in the famous experiment, okay, the conditioned stimulus is going to be the bell. Now, if before the experiment, before we started conditioning, no animal responded to the bell, none. After conditioning the animals to respond to the bell, then all of a sudden it became a conditioned stimulus. So a conditioned stimulus means it had to be taught directly in order. Sorry, McCray just came in and he's like, Pavlov, nice. So anyway, a conditioned stimulus is when you teach someone something and that becomes the trigger. So before conditioning, the bell had no response. The animals would just look at it. After conditioning, after ringing the bell and then presenting the food, the bell becomes the conditioned stimulus. And then we have the conditioned response, is how people respond to the conditioned stimulus. So if we taught dogs to hear a bell, get food, we've taught dogs to drool to the bell. Conditioned stimulus, conditioned response. So the bell meant nothing prior to conditioning. Once we trained the dogs, every time we presented food, we'd ring a bell, present food, ring a bell, present food. All of a sudden, the conditioned stimulus, which is the bell, it's what we're training them to respond to, is going to trigger a conditioned response of drooling. Okay, so just a little bit visual. So before conditioning, we had the neutral stimulus of a bell, which means it triggered no response, no dog cared. Okay, no salvation, the dog's just going to look at you. Just like if I rang a bell right now, Toby would be like, what the hell are you doing? During conditioning, I'm going to ring the bell. So while I'm teaching the dog to respond, I'm going to ring the bell, present food, ring the bell, present food, ring the bell, present food, and that's going to eventually condition the dog to drool. So eventually, the dog will hear a bell and immediately start drooling if no food needs to be presented. Okay? Questions? Sound familiar? Good. All right. So when we talk about classical conditioning, it's important that you know that classical conditioning has to be done over a certain amount of time. Like it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, it takes practice, and takes pairing. So keep that in mind. So some components of classical conditioning is stimulus generalization. Stimulus generalization is if I taught you, like for instance, do you remember my bells from class? Do you remember? I had a whole variety of them and I'd use them and you loved them so much. I had a cowbell. I had the little button one, which was my personal fave because it was like super annoying. It was great. And then I had like a duller, like bong, bong, bong one. It was great. Oh, man, I should have brought those home so we could have done it together. Wouldn't that have been great? No, you don't think we needed them? Well, damn it. So if I taught you to drool on command by hitting the little bell one, the one with the little bell button on the top, and then all of a sudden I rang a cowbell and you still drooled, that's stimulus generalization. So any bell would trigger a response. That's stimulus generalization. Stimulus discrimination is if I taught you to drool using a certain bell, like the button bell, then you would not drool with the cowbell that I used in class. So that's stimulus discrimination. You would only use this specific bell that I taught you with. Extinction is when after a period of not rehearsing or using classical conditioning, you no longer retain that information. So if I taught Toby to drool to a bell and I didn't use it for a long extended time and then I rang the bell, Toby would just stare at me and be like, what the hell are you doing? Because he forgot all of his training, and that's what we call extinction. However, if Toby remembers a little bit and starts drooling just a little bit, it's called spontaneous recovery. So if he doesn't remember the training at all, it's called extinction. If he remembers a little bit, it's then called spontaneous recovery. And higher order conditioning is when you do a bell and then you clap 3 times and then you do a little dance and then the drooling starts. Seems like a lot of work, but higher order conditioning is when you pair a neutral stimulus with another complex thing. So you just make it more complicated. We typically do this with higher order conditioning is typically done with humans. Like, for instance, every place you go and you hear a bell, do you immediately get up? No. But if you're sitting at Plant High School and you hear a bell, looking at your situation and the fact that there's a bell ringing, do you get up or flinch to get up? Yes, that's higher order conditioning. You're taking different aspects and kind of putting them together. Okay? So, food, unconditioned stimulus, salvation, unconditioned response. This is done with no training. When we introduce the bell, a first time it's a neutral stimulus and we get no response. And then during conditioning, we're pairing the bell with food. So every time we ring the bell, we give the food, ring the bell, give the food, ring the bell, give the food. All of a sudden now we get an conditioned response, which is salivating. So the conditioned stimulus is going to be the bell and the conditioned response is salvation. Salivating, not salvation. That's like a Jesus thing. Not quite food. Sorry. All right. Classical conditioning. How we feel about it? Ugh, you people aren't even going to ask me questions. I could literally sit on my couch and record this at 7 in the morning and not put on makeup for you people. There's makeup here. You may not believe it, but there's makeup there. You're welcome. All right. So, continuing with classical conditioning, we have the conditioned emotional response. Fear is always classically conditioned. Like, the reason why you hate spiders, the reason why you hate snakes, cats, dogs, or whatever, is because you've been conditioned, which means you don't sit there logically like, oh, there's a big, dog coming at me and I hate dogs. Oh, I should be scared now. You see a dog and you're like, oh my God, it's a dog. Okay, and you freak out or whatever it is. So classical conditioning is what ties to phobia because it's elicited, not selected. Elicited is what we use for classical conditioning because it comes from within without thinking. Okay, another major experiment that we talked about is the little Albert experiment. And who does the little Albert experiment? Bandura. No, Bandura does Bobo dolls. BB. It's John B. Watson, yes. John B. Watson is going to do our little Albert experiment. And what is the little Albert experiment? There you go. There you go. There you go. So, Little Albert is going to be by John B. Watson, who is also classical conditioning. So, for classical conditioning, you need to know that there's Ivan Pavlov and John B. Watson. He is going to teach Little Albert to be afraid of mice. So, behind Little Albert, he's going to present the rat. I showed you the original footage. Do you remember this? We showed him the rat, and he's like playing with the rat, and he's like kind of fascinated by the rat and stuff like that. And then during the conditioning, he stands behind Little Albert, and when Little Albert reaches out to touch the rat, he clangs a metal pipe together and scares the crap out of Little Albert. So the next time and he does that a couple times, every time he reaches for the rat, slaps the 2 metal pipes, reaches for the rat, smacks it. So then eventually, Little Albert ties that terrible clang sound to reaching out for the rat. So now he's afraid of the rat. And then because of generalization, which Grace Mary told us about, not only did we only teach him to fear rats, now he's going to start fearing anything with fur. And we see him be afraid of a monkey. We see him be afraid of a dog, a bunny, and eventually a white face, because that is called generalization. Perfect. All right. Taste aversion. Anything else about Little Albert? Any questions on that one? That's a huge experiment. No? Good talk, guys. All right. Taste aversions are also classical conditioning. So, like, for instance, when I was like in 8th grade, I had sour cream and I ate it and I threw up immediately after, and I've never had sour cream ever again. If it touches anything on my plate, I'm not going to touch it. That's McCrae's favorite thing to do when he sees something on my plate that he wants to eat. He just puts sour cream on it and says mine. And I'm not going to argue with them because I'm not going to eat it. It's just going to be thrown away because it's been contaminated with sour cream. Gross. So taste aversions are done by classical conditioning, vicarious conditioning, by watching other people go through terrible situations. You've kind of learned not to do certain things, all that stuff. All right, operant conditioning. So we're done with classical conditioning, and that's two major people you need to know is John B. Watson and Ivan Pavlov. Okay, so Pavlov is the dog salivating, and John B. Watson is little Albert. Questions about classical? No? Okay. Operant conditioning. Here we go. Operant conditioning is the learning of an involuntary behavior through the effects of a pleasant or unpleasant consequence. Ladies and gentlemen, you are choosing to have a positive or negative experience. That is different than being elicited. Elicited is what happens with classical conditioning, which means you're not thinking, you're simply responding. With operant conditioning, you're choosing what you want. Now, there are four major laws in AP Psych, and Thorndike is the first one, and it believes that if a response is followed by a pleasurable consequence, then it will be repeated. If it's followed by an unpleasant consequence, it will not be repeated. So like if every time you answered a question wrong in my class, I punched you in the face, how often are you going to answer questions in my class? 0. Oh my God, it's like I've done that now. It's like I punched all of you in the face and you won't speak to me. Moving forward, if every time that you answered a question in my class, I gave you high praise and complimented you about your intelligence, your integrity, your incredible charm and charisma, okay, A, you wouldn't believe me because I'm not very good at lying. I'm just kidding. You're all wonderful. But if it came with compliments and all that stuff, you'd be more likely to volunteer and participate in my class. That's Thorndike's law. Now, B.F. Skinner is the major guy behind operant conditioning. He's a behaviorist, which means he doesn't care why you do it. He just wants to know what you're going to do. So he creates operant conditioning, and he wants to know what after the response, the consequence. And his big thing is Skinner boxes. B.F. Skinner does Skinner boxes, and he takes rats, put them in a box, and then has them hit a button. And if they hit the button a certain amount of time, depending on their reinforcement schedule, which we'll get to here in a second, they'll get reinforcement or food. Okay, so what is reinforcement? Reinforcement is an event or a stimulus that when a following response, it increases the probability of the response will occur again. So reinforcement is making it so it happens again. So a primary reinforcer is food, sex, water. We've talked about it 10,000 times. Food, sex, water, all of that stuff is a primary reinforcer. Secondary reinforcers are going to be praise, tokens, money, cars, anything like that. So when we talk about reinforcement, you have to get one of those two things, either a primary reinforcer or a secondary reinforcer. We also have positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Now, this is where people have a tricky time, so please listen up because this could easily fit onto practically any FRQ really easy without any real effort. So if I had to guess, this would be one of the easier ways that they could include learning on their FRQ that you have coming up here shortly. So what is positive reinforcement? It is the reinforcement of a response by the addition of an experience of pleasurable stimulus. Positive reinforcement means you want to do this again, so you're going to keep doing it. For instance, if you got an A on my test tomorrow, I send you a pizza. Ooh, that sounds good. Okay, so if you get an A on tomorrow's test, I send you a pizza. I'm not doing that, by the way, because I'm poor and I'm about to have a kid. So, you know. With that being said, that's positive reinforcement. If every time you got an A on my test, you got a pizza, that would be hella awesome, don't you think? That would be super motivating. No? Are you guys not watching? No? Fine. Negative reinforcement is when a response or removal or escape from or avoidance of an unpleasant stimulus. So imagine if you did poorly on my test and I would call and me, you, and your parents would sit down in a Zoom chat room and talk about your score and talk about how awful you did on your test and how miserable that would be. You would not want to have that experience again, so you would do everything you could to avoid it. That's a negative reinforcement. If every time you every time you got a question wrong on tomorrow's test, I kick you in the shins, ooh, that would hurt. That would be negative reinforcement because you don't want to get that many questions wrong because you don't want to be kicked in the shin. Negative reinforcement, you're avoiding something. Positive reinforcement, you're doing it to get something. Questions? Comments? Are we alive? Well, if I kick you in the shins once, you're going to want that again, Grace Mary? Yeah, so what are you going to do for the next test? Do whatever you can to avoid getting kicked in the shins. True, not true? Because, have you ever been kicked in the shins? It's awful, and it hurts for days. So that's why it's negative reinforcement, is because once it happens, you're going to want to avoid it as much as possible. So, all right. When we're talking about operant conditioning, we're also dealing with shaping, which is how we change people's behavior into a more complex behavior. So when we talk about teaching small steps into things and kind of evolving behavior as we go. Like, for instance, the expectations in kindergarten are not the same expectations that there are in 5th grade. Can we agree? They're definitely not the expectations you have in 10th grade. With that being said, that's shaping. We teach small skills in order to string them together to eventually get a more complex behavior. Same thing that we do with animals, training animals and stuff like that. The first time I tried to teach Toby to sit on command, I'd push his butt down and say sit and give him a treat. So I'd say sit, push his butt down, sit, feed him a treat. And then eventually now I can just say sit and he will happily sit and not even need a treat. So when we talk about operant conditioning, we also have extinction, generalization, spontaneous recovery. Those concepts are the same because of the learning that is required. So if I teach Toby to sit using positive reinforcement, which means every time he sits, he gets a treat, eventually, if I stop using the word sit, he will lose it. That's extinction. If I use... Like, for instance, Toby has a generalized, so I was talking about him, so now he's here. Do you want to see Toby? He's black, so you can't really, he's like, Toby. Oh, there you are. Toby, over here. Say hi. Yeah, he's not the brightest, but he's sweet. Anyway. With generalization, I taught him how to sit using these little teeny tiny little treats. Now he responds to any type of treat to say sit, or any type of reinforcement, or even just a pat on the head means he'll do it. So that's generalized. And then spontaneous recovery. I don't make him lie down. Like, I don't say it often, but I can say it to him and he'll be like, oh, okay, lie down. And every once in a while he'll remember what that means. But when my husband says it, he remembers because he makes him lie down all the time. All right. When we're dealing with operant conditioning, unlike classical conditioning, and this is unique, we have punishment. Okay. Punishment is when in any event or object is when following a response that makes the response less likely to happen again. So if Toby doesn't do exactly what I want, I can punish him by smacking him on the snoot. Okay. Especially like this morning, he was kind of aggressive with another dog this morning. So I made him sit and I smacked him on the snoot. That's his punishment because he hates being smacked on the snoot. Okay. Now, we as people are more complex than a dog. So we have different types of punishment. You don't get smacked on the snoot, I assume. With that being said, we have punishment by application. So like, for instance, anyone's family here really into punishment by application, like do chores? Yes. Yeah. Okay. That is, you have to add the addition of experiencing unpleasant stimulus. Like, no one likes to do laundry for the whole house. No one wants to do the dishes for everyone. My dad really liked lawn work. when I was a kid, like mowing the lawn, raking leaves. I know you people don't really know about that, but up in New England, that's a thing. And snow removal. Ugh, there's nothing worse than shoveling off the back porch of snow when you don't need your back porch like shoveled. That was so annoying. Anyway, moving forward. And then punishment by removal, which is the punishment, which is probably the most common. Your parents probably take your cell phone away. Yes. Take away your freedoms, technology, all that stuff. That would be punishment by removal. All right. So we've done this in class. It's different, like little quizzes and stuff like that. I'll go through them. I'll pause here for a second. So if you want to go through them and check your responses later on the video, you're more than welcome to, but I'm not going to sit here and kind of go through them. So I'm going to pause here. So when you get to this on the video, you can stop and guess, and then these are your answers, and I'll go by really quickly, but you can go back and check your answers if you want to do a little quiz on them later. So how to make punishment more effective, especially when you're dealing with dogs, and I guess children too. It should be immediate. So if they do something bad, like for instance, when I was potty training Toby, when he pooped on the floor or peed on the floor, we had to immediately stop that, and we had to punish him immediately. Because if we let him pee on the floor and we just sit there and watch him do it, and like 10 minutes later, he'd be confused of what he did wrong. Every single time Toby peed on the floor when he was a puppy, we used to put his snoot in the pee and smack his snoot and say no. And every single time he did it, that's exactly what the expectation was. And that's what the punishment was. And then anytime Toby peed outside when we were teaching him, we would do like a little dance, and we would have like little treats for him. And we'd be like, yes, Toby. So when he peed out, he's so excited over here. Like you can't see him, but like he loves being talked about, I'll tell you. While we would do like a little dance and like super excited, and we would like Toby, and it would make him so happy. So that way he'd really want to pee outside. And I'll tell you, when he's sick and he pees inside, like because he's sick, like, or he poops inside because he's like really, really sick, it makes him so sad. And that's because he wants to make us happy. All right. Schedules of reinforcement are what is happening inside the Skinner boxes. So we have positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, we have punishment, and then we also have reinforcement schedules. So the first schedule is partial reinforcement. It's a tendency for a response that is reinforced after some but not all correct responses. This is going to be the one that will last the longest. And if I was you, I'd make a note of that on your focus or your study guide. It lasts the longest. So for instance, I don't give Toby a treat every time he sits down. I don't give Toby a treat every time I ask him to do something and he does it, because then he'll get bored of treats. But every once in a while, I'll give him a treat for like sitting, and it will remind him like, oh yeah, I got to do that. And then I'll go a couple times without doing it. It'll allow and it extends the learning longer. Continuous reinforcement is every time Toby sits, he gets a treat. Every time he does something, he gets something. Like for instance, probably in elementary school, when you read a book, you used to get like a gold star every time. Yes? Hello? Okay? That's continuous reinforcement. Eventually, the stars don't mean anything. Like for instance, if every single time you answer a question, I gave you a cookie, eventually the cookies, you'd be like, oh, I'm so over those cookies. Like, ugh, I'm over it. Actually, I would never feel that way, but some of you might. With that being said, continuous reinforcement is the fastest way to learn a skill, but it's also the fastest way for it to be removed. So overuse is going to stop it. So continuous reinforcement is the fastest way to pick up a skill. However, continuous reinforcement is going to have the fastest burnout, which means people aren't going to continue doing it. Other schedules of reinforcement is a fixed ratio. Fixed means it's consistent of time. Ratio means it's the number of hits. So if you're thinking of that little bell I have in class, the little button bell, fixed ratio means every third time I hit the bell, I get a treat. 1, 2, 3, I get a treat. 1, 2, 3, I get a treat. 1, 2, 3, I get a treat. That's a fixed ratio. A variable ratio is when it changes. So instead of hitting it 3 times, 1, 2, 3, treat, I have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then I get a treat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, then I get a treat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, then I get a treat. That's variable ratio. Fixed ratio, same number of hits. Variable ratio, different number of hits. 1-to-1 is I hit it, I get a treat. I hit it, I get a treat. I hit it, I get a treat. Everyone good on ratios? Ratios is the number of hits. Variable intervals, or interval, is time-based. So once I hit the button, I've started a timer. So I hit the button, and if it's a fixed interval, every 10 seconds. So I hit the button, then I have to wait 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then I get a treat. Hit the button again, time starts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's a fixed interval or fixed time interval. Variable interval. I hit the button, 1, 2, 3, I get a treat. Hit the button, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All of a sudden now I have to wait 6 seconds to get a treat. Then I hit the button again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So time changes. So fixed means it's the same. Variable means it changes. If it's ratio, it's the number of hits. If it's interval, it's time-based. How is that? We're okay? Does this sound familiar? All right. We went over those. Okay, we did that. Perfect. All right, so we are almost done, I promise. All right, so when we're talking about conditioning, we have some limitations. Like instinctual drift is we can only teach an animal so much. We can't teach too much. Like, for instance, no matter how good of a dog trainer I am, and I'm really not. Like, I can do basic stuff. Like, my dog is not a bad dog, but he's not, like, a good dog. He's also not the brightest. Just don't tell him. With that being said, no matter how much I train him, Toby's never going to sit at the dining room table and cut his own meat with a fork and knife. Like, he's just not. No matter how much I try training him, he just can't do it. He's he's incapable of doing it because of his limitations. That's instinctive drift. Behavior modification is an operant conditioning when we try to change a behavior. We do this all the time. You do it with your friends all the time. You do it with your family members all the time. It's when you're trying to use positive, which is the most effective, positive reinforcement in order to change people's behaviors. Like, I've done this with McCrae. That's why your girl gets flowers every single Sunday, okay? That's behavior modification. Do you think McCrae came walking into grocery stores and be like, you know what, my girl deserves flowers? Hell no. I trained him. Like, oh my God, look how beautiful these flowers are. And then he would buy me flowers and I would give him lots and lots of compliments and all of that. Now we walk in there and he's like, oh, Faye, you need flowers. And I'm like, you're right. I do. And I don't even compliment him anymore. I just take the flowers and put them in my classroom and they look so nice. Behavior modification. Token economy means that you get something in return for doing certain things. Like, for instance, in elementary school, there was probably like a pirate box or something. Like, you would read 5 books and you get to go grab, a piece of candy from the jar or, some tacky little item from the pirate box and stuff like that. That's a token economy. If you've ever been in Ren's classroom, his Ren's bucks or Billy bucks, that's a token economy. He runs his whole class on a token economy. Timeouts. It's a mild punishment just by removing people away and changing their attention to something else. Happens all the time. So when we talk about biofeedback, is using your biological conditions to invoke involuntary stuff. So using food. Neurofeedback is engaging the brain, getting you to do it. All right. So cognition. Nope. Any questions on classical or operant? That's a lot of stuff, guys. We're feeling okay? Hello? Are we glad we're going over this? Are you alive? Do you have a pulse? Wow, Roxy. Thank you, Nathan. All right, here we go. So your other types of learning, my darlings, so we can be done with this. All right, is Tolman's, and he is latent learning. So Tolman is all about latent learning. He's the guy who does like the boring mouse, like mazes and stuff like that. Yes, do you remember him? And we learned essentially with latent learning is we learn that learning occurs even without reinforcement. And that's Tolman's big thing. Learning can occur without reinforcement. And he does he does like maps and internal maps and stuff like that. All right. Insight learning is when you don't understand something and then all of a sudden it clicks and you're like, oh my God, I figured it out. Like you can't solve a math problem and you go outside and start playing basketball and then like, oh my God, I figured out how to do it. That's insight learning, like that aha moment. Insight is by who? Oh shit. Who's the guy behind Insight? Do we have a person for that? Kohler, yeah. Oh, yeah, the stupid monkeys. That's right. That's the experiment. I mean, the brilliant monkeys. You remember in class I showed you. Sorry, I'm also at home too. Quarantine's hard over here too. He's the guy who we watched a monkey then had a peanut in the jar and you couldn't just dump out the jar. So he eventually is like, can't figure it out. And then he comes back and spits water into the tube. Yes, do you remember? And then picks out the peanut from it. That's Insight. Kohler. Thank you for being here, people. Yeah, it's the monkey and the stick. All of that falls under Kohler. So the stick, he's also like the pigeon. The pigeon has to hit the little box over to get the little banana thing. Yes, do you remember that? Okay. Learned helplessness. Who's the dude behind Learned helplessness? Siegelman. Yeah, remember he's the guy with the golden retrievers. He electrocuted 100% of the cage and taught them that they had no escape, and then slowly from 100 to 90 to 80, 70, 60, all the way down. Once they get down to like 60%, what do the dogs stop doing? Yeah, they stop trying to escape because we've already taught them over and over again for the first tries that they can't find any escape or refuge in their little caged, like electrical box. So they just end up lying there and just taking the abuse. And that's learned helplessness. The tendency to fail to act or escape a situation because of repeated failures in the past. So learned helplessness is Seligman, and that's the guy electrocuting golden retrievers. There you go. And then we have observational learning, which is, of course, by our man Bandura. Nope, that's a lie. That's a lie. Bobo dolls is, yeah, it's Bandura. Okay, sorry. I'm just so excited we're almost done because I know how, super engaged you all are. Like, woo. Anyway, observational learning is learning a behavior by watching a model perform. And Bobo dolls is the famous experiment by Bandura. And Bandura had a bunch of kids watch a grown-up beat up a Bobo doll all by them in a room all by themselves and no other additional toys or anything. That adult just went there and just started punching it and stuff like that. Then they let the kids into a room that was filled with tons and tons of toys and a Bobo doll. And every single kid is going to pick up that Bobo doll and start punching it, just like the adult did. Now, they're going to imitate the adult, but what is the scary thing about observational learning? They escalated, absolutely. So in this experiment, not only are they punching the doll like the adult does, is that they are taking other tools, specifically guns and other weapons, and using it against the Bobo doll. So not only are they replicating the behavior, but they're advancing the behavior, which is why it's really important as adults we filter what kids see, because it's not only do they mimic what they see, but they also add to what they see, and that is the scary part. So there you go. So 4 elements of observational learning. In order to have observational learning, you have to be paying attention. Like you can't watch something and learn something. Like, how many times have you sat in a class and you've watched a lesson and then you weren't paying attention, and how much of that lesson have you retained? 0. Memory, it has to be something that you can retain in your memory. It's like, it has to be memorable. It has to keep your attention, and it has to be something worthy of you remembering. Imitation, it has to be something that you want to be able to imitate. Like, for instance, punching a Bobo doll looks kind of fun. Like, you saw it, like, it kind of comes back at you, so you can do like sparring with it and all that stuff. Like, it looks fun. So the imitation, the kids were definitely interested in doing that. And then you have to have the motivation. If it's considered lame and no one's doing it, then the kids aren't going to replicate it. But if it's, like, for instance, right now, observational learning is happening all the time, especially with your generation, your stupid TikTok videos. How many of those stupid videos have you made with the stupid dancing things? I don't understand TikTok. I'm not smart enough to do it. Like, I just don't fundamentally get it. But, like, that's all observational learning. You see people responding positively to them, and so it has the attention. You sit there and you learn the stupid dances. You imitate it because you want to gain the popularity of TikTok. And you have the motivation because, A, you have nothing else to do, let's be honest. And on top of it, that's what your generation does, which is very strange. My generation does memes. That's mine. You're welcome. Your generation does TikTok. I win. Anyway. All right, that's it. So that's all I got for you. Questions, concerns, comments. So tomorrow you do have a test, 35 questions on states of consciousness, sensation and perception, and learning. Is there anything I can help you with, or any questions? No? Wow. Well, guys, please stop being so chatty. It's overwhelming and so disruptive. Woo. Just wild. Anyway, tomorrow you do have a test, 35 questions, all multiple choice. Same exact format that you have been doing. It's an actual picture of a test, and then on a separate sheet of paper, 1 through 35, mark your answers on it, and then I'd go back to the multiple choice and fill in the answers. You also have a Barron's book due by midnight, so please make sure. This time around is your second time around, so the kindness is not going to necessarily be there, because I rejected some of yours and said, hey, if you get this to me by midnight, I'll happily accept it. This is round 2, and tomorrow I have 97 plus books coming in from AP World, plus my 60 coming in for AP Psych. So, like, you know what the expectations are, because we're round 2. Is everyone good? Yes? So you can submit your video via Instagram or Edsby, whatever is easier. I'd prefer Edsby just because, you know, it's Edsby and it's easier. But it's easier for me, and I think it's more obviously appropriate. But Instagram was the most popular because I think it's just significantly easier for you to send. Can we agree? No, I know. I get that for sure. So anyway, it's fine. If you submit it to me on Instagram, there's no punishment. There's no recourse. I'm completely going to accept it. Not a problem. I would just prefer Edsby, but it doesn't work that well, and here we are. Questions, concerns, comments? All right. Well, I enjoyed spending my time with myself today, and I'm glad you could watch me talk to myself today, so that's nice. What? Oh, thanks. So, all right, guys. So you have a test tomorrow and a Barron's book tomorrow. We do not have a Zoom lecture. You've got plenty of things going on. I hope you have a great day. Go outside. It's beautiful. Now, stay near your house. Don't break CDC codes, and wear a mask if you go out. But, like, out with people, not like sitting in your backyards, you weirdos. But go out and enjoy the sun. All right. Goodbye, my darlings. Finish those Barron's books. Bye. Bye, my darlings.